Turning pins is a fast, fun project. It is a great way to share your wood turning skills with others, since pins make great gifts that you can easily personalize. Today, we're going to go through the entire pin turning process, including 5 power tips to help you master pin turning. The pin we're working on today is a Nouveau Scepter pin from Penn State Industries. It is a capped pin, so much like this Sharpie, we're going to have 2 different pieces that we end up with when we're done. I'm working with a different material today than what I'm used to. This is a stabilized burl, so it's going to be fun to see how that works out. And you'll get to kind of come along and see how the process works. Before we go over to the lathe, we have a few steps here at the workbench. So let's get started. With this pin kit, my tubes are different diameters and different lengths. So I want to make sure I have my blanks marked so that we can trim them down and get them down to the right size. All I'm going to do here is just I like to lay the tube down, just make a mark. With this dark material, I knew I'd have trouble seeing a mark, so I wrapped it with blue tape, and I want to leave myself with a little bit of room on both ends of the tube. We'll talk about that later, and we're going to come back and trim down that length. So once we've got our tubes marked out, we're just going to take this over. I'm going to take it to a bandsaw and cut these off, but you can trim these with any type of saw that you would like. Power tip number 1 is to use your lathe for drilling. When we're working on pins and other kit projects like this, we do need to get a good hole right in the middle of our blank, perfectly straight up and down, or as perfect as we can get it. A drill press will work. But in order to use a drill press, I've got to have some kind of vise to hold my blank so that it doesn't twist and turn and do all kinds of things as you're drilling straight into the end. So with a couple of specialty items for your lathe, I've got my pin jaws here for my Nova 2 chuck. Other chuck manufacturers have pin jaws as well. And then a Jacobs chuck here in my tailstock. Now I can do my drilling operations here at the lathe, and I guarantee you're going to use this Jacobs chuck for more things in the future too. I use this when I'm drilling or boring holes in vases. I use it in bowls to get a depth hole. I use this in almost every project at the lathe. When we're working on pins and other project kits like this, it's really important to have the right size drill bits. Whether we're using the lathe to drill or a drill press to drill, you need the right size drill bit. In this case, I needed to buy these for this Nouveau Scepter pin kit. We need a 12.5 millimeter drill bit and a 10.5 millimeter. I didn't have both of those sizes. I have also gone out and gotten this metric drill bit set, which has helped me fill in a few things in a pinch as well. I've got the blank for the lower portion of my pin here in the pin jaws ready to go. I've got my 10.5 millimeter drill bit, so we're just going to use this setup to drill out the holes for our tubes. I've got my lathe speed turned down to about 325 RPMs. So let's go ahead and drill these holes. I'll leave links in the description below for all the tools and supplies that we're using here on these pins, just to help you with your own research if there's anything you need to pick up. Now we've switched to the 12.5 millimeter drill bit so we can drill out our upper blanks. We've got our holes bored in both of our blanks, our lower blank and our upper blank. So now it's time to glue in the brass tubes. I always like to start with my brass tubes and scuff them up just a little bit with a little bit of sandpaper I've got. This is just a little 220. This just helps give the super glue or CA glue little something to bite on. So once I've got those scuffed up, get our CA glue out here, just super glue, and we'll just kind of get it on here. And we'll just insert the tube right into our blank. I always like to rotate the tube around inside the blank just a little bit, trying to get the glue spread all the way around. So I'm hitting the ends with accelerator just to hold that tube in place. You can see here this tube is really bigger than this tool. I'm going to use it just to help me hold it. One of the reasons I like to cut the blanks a little bit long when we are starting is so that I've got a little material left here. Hopefully you can see where the brass tube is. It's inset from the edge of the blank. While we're drilling, if we have any tear out or blowout on the back side when we're cutting our holes, having that little bit of extra material just kind of helps us make sure we've got a little bit of extra material just in case that happens. Here in our next step, we'll trim these blanks right back down to that brass tube, so that extra material really won't make much difference. So now we're just going to set these aside and let them dry. Even though we've used accelerator, that accelerator is not getting into the center of that blank, so we do want to give it a few minutes to dry. We've got our brass tubes glued into our blanks, and before we take the chuck with our pin jaws off the lathe, we're going to use one last drilling operation. So we're just going to get our blank here in our pin jaws, and we've replaced the drill bits with a barrel trimmer. So we're just going to kick this back on, and this barrel trimmer is going to trim down our blank right down to that brass tube. So this will get us a nice flush surface right up. Make sure we've got it nice and perpendicular and square. Get rid of any irregularities. So we just kind of keep working this in and out, and then we'll work right down to our brass tube. Once we've got this trimmed on both ends of each blank, we'll be ready to get everything set up and start our turning. Now that we've got our pin blanks trimmed down with the barrel trimmer down to our brass tubes, it's time to assemble everything to our pin mandrel and get ready to turn. Power tip number 2 is to buy the bushing packs that correspond with the pin kit you're working on. In this case, on the pin that we're working on here, the Nouveau Scepter pin, it's really important because most of our pin mandrels are designed for a 7mm pin or pin tube. This pin tube that I've got in my hand is 10.5mm. The other one for the cap is 12.5mm. So it's just going to rattle around on here if we don't have these bushings. So this bushing is designed, it's going to slide into the pin to help it hold it in place on our mandrel, but it also gives us the larger diameter where we want to turn our material down so it meets up with the hardware. So let's get everything assembled and get ready to turn. For this pin, I've added a couple of the kind of typical 7mm bushings, and they're just on here to give us a little room here at the headstock. So I've put a couple of those on here, and these are not part of the bushing pack that I bought for this pin. So then we're going to put our bushing on. We're going to put this is the lower blank. Then here in the middle we have this stepped down bushing. So we're going to put it on, get it aligned on our tube. We're going to put our upper tube on, our upper blank on, sorry, and it's going to slide over the top part of the bushing. Then we have a bushing up here that's going to give us the cap, and then I'm going to put a spacer on here, and then just our nut and washer. And then our pin mandrel is fully assembled and we're ready to turn. And on the tailstock, we don't need a lot of pressure. We just want to kind of hold this end in place. I like to start pins with my spindle roughing gouge just to get off the sharp corners, and then we'll use some other tools just to kind of get our shapes refined.
We've created a fully illustrated blog post that works like step-by-step instructions of our pin turning process that you can print out and take to your shop. Just put pins in the comments section below and we'll send you a link to that blog so you can download and print it out.
We've got this small void filled in with black CA glue. It's still a little rough, but I think it'll smooth out when we sand. So we're going to start sanding. I'm starting out at 120 grit. We'll probably work up to about 600. So let's get that started. Now, one of the things that we want to do as we're sanding is to come back and sand just really lightly by hand, kind of or in this case, this material doesn't have much grain, but this will just help get rid of some of the radial marks, especially if we do this at each grit. It just takes a second, just really lightly by hand. And once we've got, here we're using 120 as kind of our starting point. Once we've got the 120 done, it's just a matter of kind of hitting it briefly with each of the grits. So we've sanded all the way through our grits, so our pin's now ready for finish. I like to apply a CA glue finish to most pins. It's a fast, durable, effective finish, and it works out pretty well. We can polish it to a pretty high shine. So I like to add 3 to 5 coats of CA glue before I start polishing. So that's what we're going to start with. I've got the lathe turned down to about 325 RPMs or so. So we're just going to put a little dab. So I'm going to kick on the lathe. I'm going to put a little dab of CA glue here on one corner of a paper towel. And I'm just going to wipe that on both the lower portion and the upper portion. We're going to rotate our rag as we go along. I'm going to hit this with a little accelerator to get that so we can build our coats pretty rapidly. I'll give that a second to kind of dry. We're going to rotate the paper towel in our hand, and this will help us keep track of how many coats we put on. I usually just kind of dab it with my finger and see if it's dry. So now it's time just to add the second coat. Power tip number 3. Even though we used accelerator to help get this dry really quickly, let's give this 10 or 15 minutes before we start polishing, just to make sure it's good and hard and our polishing will work flawlessly. Back with the CA glue dry, and now it's time to polish our pin. So here's power tip number 4, which is use water or something to help lubricate the polishing process. Today I'm using micro mesh pads, and we're just going to kind of work through the grits. This one starts here. This light green is 400. We're going to use a little dab of water, and we're going to work up through our grits up to about 12,000 grit on our polishing. I've got the lathe speed kicked up nice and high, a little over 2,000 RPMs. This process is a little bit messy. We get a little slurry here on the workpiece. But that's all we need to do right there. Get the slurry off there. And then we're going to work on to the next grit. So here I just want to press. I just want to hold that. I don't really want to press. I'm just holding the pad up to the workpiece, letting the lathe do the work. The last step I like to take in the polishing process is to use a little bit of this CA polish. We'll just put a little dab on a clean paper towel, kick that back on. Just kind of wipe it on. We'll rotate the towel over to a clean, dry spot and take it back off again. And our polishing's done. Now it's time to assemble our pin. And here's power tip number 5. Use your lathe as a press to help you assemble your pin. We can buy pin presses, but we don't necessarily need to. Most of the time I can use scrap blocks and shape them as I need for different pin kits. So let's get started. I'm just going to insert this block. I've got a small hole drilled here in the end. And in the instructions today, it says the first thing to press is the cap. So we've got our cap for our pin, and we're going to press it into the widest opening here on the upper part of our pin blank. So I've got a small hole there to help the pin cap drop down in there. I'm just going to bring up the tailstock, and I'm just going to use it very gently. Sometimes I do change the tip. This opening is pretty wide, so I've just got my kind of normal tip on there, and then I just very gently use my tailstock to press that part in place. So once again, we're going to leave the cap kind of seated in here. Here's our part that we need to press, and we've got this band here in the middle. So the band is just going to fit over here, and we're going to press that into place. We can actually get it started a little bit by hand, which is helpful. So we just want to very gently press this in place with our tailstock. Okay, so I think our cap is ready to go. For the lower tube on our pin, we're going to press these couplers into each end. So we want the threaded part left open, or we want the threaded part exposed when we're done. And on this one, so I can use the small recess I have here for pin caps for both to press all of these parts together. So I've just got that lined up together. I'm going to bring up my tailstock. We'll kind of wind it forward here a little bit. I've got it aligned. Just kind of get that snugged up. And then once again, just very gently get these parts pressed together. Okay, so there's one end. We've got a coupler, basically same piece, same part that we need to put in the other end. So let's wrap up the assembly of our pin here. If If you have sewing lovers in your life, seam rippers are another great gift idea and that you can turn that's very similar to pins. I've got a video right here that'll walk you through that process, and I'll see you there.